What's up everyone? Lance Hedrick here, and today we've got a battle for the ages. In my left corner, we've got the heavyweight champion, the La Marzocco Linea Micra, coming in at $4,000 US. And in my right corner, the little Delonghi Stylosa, coming in at around $140 US. And in today's battle, we will see if the David can topple the Goliath. We're going to take a list of different metrics that we can kind of look at with each machine, and we'll see which one performs better or the same or whatever it might be in order to understand what this price difference really is all about. Is it truly a better cup of coffee, or is it just the materials the machine is made out of? Price, build quality, heat up time, sound, the shot pulling capability with both light and dark roast, consistency, so back-to-back shots, steaming capabilities, extraction, so whether or not one extracts more or less than the other at a constant depth, and finally a taste test where I'll have two special guests on to taste the two and see if they can identify the more expensive cup. Now, of course, the goal of this is not truly to say one is better than the other, but more so to have an in-depth look at what is causing these price differences with specific styles of machines. Now, to be sure, this test is between two machines that are just flat pressure machines, meaning they just ramp up to a specific pressure and they maintain that pressure till the end of the shot. Now, the La Marzocco has notoriety for being kind of the luxury machine everyone talks about, especially if they're not very inundated in coffee. And then this Delonghi is what I think is by far the best featherweight or really cheap option for good espresso. Comes with a single boiler made of stainless steel and is pretty easy to repair. So that's why I kind of chose these two and why we're using these in the case study. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Now we're getting into the weeds today. It's going to be a long video. It's going to be quite verbose, but we are going to hit everything that you could possibly want. And of course, if I miss something, let me know below. And if you like this style of video, and if there are machines you'd like me to put head to head in the future, trying it out, seeing if you all enjoy it. But anyway, I would love it if you would hit the like and subscribe to help support the channel. I also have a really neat Patreon. We have a Discord connected where I do lives very frequently, and on my YouTube Unfiltered page, only viewable to Patreon during the live session, so you can ask questions there, but also you get free equipment because guess what? All the Patreon funds goes towards production and buying equipment, so I can give it right back to you all. But anyway, let's get on with this super long movie-esque video. Thanks. The La Marzocco, depending on where you're at, sits around $4,000 US or something, somewhere around that price range. Of course, it's going to vary around the world in the same way every machine kind of does. Very expensive, especially when you're considering it's just heating up water and pushing it through a puck without any type of fancy profiling capabilities. On the other hand, the Delonghi, depending on the time of year, sits around $100 to $140 US. Now, I got mine even below $100 because I got it on a Black Friday sale. But it is way cheaper, but of course it's made a lot less quality parts. Let's say that they did fail because they're made of cheaper materials. You could go through 40 of these before having to pay for one of the La Marzoccos. Now, of course, we don't want these in the landfill. You can absolutely salvage this through simple restoration, which I have a whole video showing you how to restore a defunct Delonghi on my secondary channel, which I'll link below and above right there. But first round goes to the Delonghi. Obviously, build quality is resoundingly in favor of the La Marzocco. It is built with stainless steel, brass, copper, everything that you can imagine inside of this machine to make it last forever if you don't use bad water in your machine, which I know a lot of you do, so stop doing that. It's got a brew boiler and a massive steam boiler inside to give you the capability of doing both things at once. You have app connectivity where you can control the temperature and all of that stuff. There's also lots of really cool mods that you can do to the La Marzocco, which I know some of you are going, why the fudge would I spend $4,000 on a machine I need to modify? Well, it can actually be an incredible machine with some easy modifications. One being from Jake G, the godfather of coffee machine modifications, where you can make this a flow profiling beast. Why they don't come with the flow profiling capability is beyond me, but in any event, you are able to do that. Now, the Delonghi is capable of receiving a lot of modifications as well, but it's a much more simplistic build made with Plastic, unless you get the ECP3420, which has stainless steel sides, I would recommend buying that over this, but it is like 30 or 40 bucks more expensive. It does have a stainless steel boiler, which I am a huge fan of because it makes everything way more simple. And a vibratory pump is very easy to replace if you do need to replace it because, again, you're using bad water. Second round, clearly in favor of the La Marzocco. For me, I have no patience with heat up. I am so into boilerless machines at this point when it comes to ferro technology. Thermoblocks can be nice, and in the Espresso, I think they have a really nice thermoblock, but for the most part, when you're buying cheap machines and they have thermoblocks, they're kind of crap. Ferro technology, if you're not familiar, is that which is in Breville/Sage machines. It's also that which is in the Monument, that $20,000 Swiss watch machine of lever machines that James Hoffman has reviewed. It's also in the Tone machines, which they have brewers, and a forthcoming commercial machine with this technology inside. You also have a decent espresso machine, which has a similar idea with 2-meter long coiled up heating element inside, which flash heats the water quite quickly. But even still, this has a much smaller boiler with some, clever ways of heating it up really quickly. 5 to 8 minutes and you're Gucci to Gochi. The Delonghi is actually a little faster. This one takes just a couple of minutes because it's a tiny little steam boiler that's stainless steel and it's only one boiler. Considering the portafilter is not a hunk of stainless steel, it's much thinner and aluminum, it's ready to go really fast. Heat up time is slightly in favor of the Delonghi, though between 2 and 5 minutes, honestly. Once you're past 30 seconds, to me it's like, okay, well I still need to go walk and do something else while I'm waiting. We know that gear pumps and rotary pumps are much quieter, so the La Marzocco with a rotary pump is much quieter. Let's listen to it. Just a nice little hum. Inside the Delonghi, as I've already said, it has a vibratory pump, so when we turn it on, so much louder due to the big vibrations, the oscillations of the piston inside in order to push water at a certain pressure through the system. So this next one goes to the La Marzocco. Well, now we're going to really see which one comes out on top, as we're going to pull some espresso. I'm going to pull a really lightly roasted coffee and a darkly roasted coffee on both, and we're going to see if one is better. But before we do it, it should be noted, what I'm going to say is not solely based off the shots pulled here. I've probably pulled more on the decent than this, but this is the second most shots pulled on any machine I own, and it's because I use it very often for different experiments I do, due to the fact that it has rock solid stability throughout all of its metrics. And then this one, same thing, I pulled tons of shots on it. In fact, there was a solid 3 or 4 weeks where this was my main espresso machine because of the fast heat up time, the fact it was already plugged in, and the smaller diameter portafilter made life really easy. So let's get these shots going. The Linea Micra has the capability in the app of starting and stopping the pump. So that's what I did there. Started the pump at 5 seconds, saturated the puck, turned off, let it sit for 5 seconds, and re-engage the pump for the full shot. I did 21 grams in because I like them deep pucks. I did 40 grams out for a slightly under a 1 to 2 type of shot. Then on the Delosa, I matched the bed depth. Because there's no solenoid valve like there is on the Linea, I turned it on manually for 5 seconds, and then I shut it off manually for 5 seconds. And then I re-engaged the pump again for the full shot. So they were pulled in the same way. Now, one of the first things I can tell is the crema seems to be a bit more kind of spongy on the Delonghi, but I wouldn't really read too far into that. Anyway, what really matters is the taste. Upon further visual inspection, the bubbles in the crema on the Delonghi are bigger, and I'm not quite sure why that is. We use the same grinder, same grind size, same bed depth, and so I'm wondering if maybe that's the result of the vibratory pump, whereas this is a more smooth kind of pressuring, smooth kind of delivery of water over the puck. I don't know why that would cause this more sponge-like texture on here, but it may be indistinguishable on the tongue. Its surfactants are falling off bubbles, they're exposing them. It's a whole science. But so let's get to sipping. First is the La Marzocco. Yep, so we have kind of obviously dark chocolate. We've got some burnt kind of char. There's a little bit of vanilla in there. Overall, the sweetness isn't really as much as I would like, but again, we're pulling on flat pressure machines. Not a ton we can really expect. The body was okay. It can definitely be better, but there's definitely a difference. This one is maybe a little bit more flat on the body, so it's not as bubbly. That's a weird word to say, but it's not as bubbly or coating as it is with the La Marzocco, though it is very similar, and I think a lot of people would have issues telling the difference. That's why we'll have other tasters come in later. I will say there's a nice soft, mild melon acidity in this one that is not really present in the La Marzocco, but we'll measure extractions later and see what's really going on between the two. But overall, I think they're both really nice coffees. I would give the advantage to the La Marzocco for a nicer tactile experience, but I think kind of the more complex espresso is shockingly with the Delonghi, and that might be because of a smaller diameter, and so we're getting maybe a bit more of an even extraction or something along those lines, but I'm not quite sure because it was same bed depth. But in the end, very similar shots. It's going to be a much more difficult process to tell them apart when they're really darkly roasted coffees. The darker the coffee, the easier to extract, the less consequential everything else becomes. This isn't even French roast, or really it's not necessarily Neapolitan roast. I've measured the color on it, and the coffee I'm using now from Saka is it's similar to a dark roast you'd get in a specialty shop in the United States. I'm not quite sure which one I would lean towards because this one does have a better tactile, but this one's a bit more complex. But I'm not necessarily looking for complexity when I'm drinking darker coffee. So maybe because of that, I would lean towards the shot from the La Marzocco, though it's not a landslide by any means. This one only gets about 4.5 mils a second, so it's going to make it have a longer extraction. I think if I were to have a bit coarser grounds, it would be a lot closer in the taste. But even still, you may say, well, then where do you do it? Well, the point is not one is going to taste better than the other. My point with this testing is they're pretty comparable when it comes to darker roasted coffees if you're dialing in well and if you have a good grinder. Grinder is key. All right, light roast time. Let's see their capabilities. All right, now I've got some Tim Wendelboe Honduras Nacimiento inside of the portafilters. Same exact parameters, but this time I'm going to pull a bigger ratio, closer to a 1:3. And here we go. The temperatures in both, the Delonghi sitting at about 68, whereas the La Marzocco at about 65. So there's a couple of degrees differential, but honestly, it could just be because different yields, different, it also, we don't have a PID controller on the Delonghi, so we're kind of guessing on what that start temp is after we flush it. But even still, we'll take a little taste test. Honestly, as they're sitting, they kind of are equalizing out, but it was just a smidge darker on the LM, but now they're about the same. So about same ratios, everything else, let's give it a stir and a taste test. Now, it's with light roast out, a lot of people complain that cheaper machines can't really hold up because they need higher temperatures. As I've shown in recent videos, I don't think high temps are necessary if you're pulling in specific ways, but in any event, these should both be at around 90 to 92 degrees. Let's taste the Delonghi's. It's really good, really nice acidity, super stratified, solid texture. I mean, when you're using a good grinder, that should dictate a lot of the times the texture, but of course, how you pull it and the way the water's distributed over the puck can have some changes there. Let's taste the La Marzocco. Also very smooth. This one has a bit more intense of an acidity to a point where it's a little imbalanced to me, but it does have a nicer sweetness that's holding it up. This one is not as sweet, but has a much more balanced acidity presentation. Both, I would say, are probably equally enjoyable. So I can't really choose one over the other. But even still, in the testing that I've done, I found that both are very much capable of pulling light roasted coffees. But you're always going to be held back when you're doing flat bar shots. I can't say that enough. So there's definitely ways I prefer pulling lighter roasted coffees in this, but point stands. There's not a clear winner, something that's going to blow you away in difference using the same grinder. All right, let's go to the next. I don't think it's very often that people are pulling more than 3 double shots in a row. So I'm just going to focus on 3 in a row. Now, the La Marzocco is honestly probably capable of commercial use. The Mini is obviously more robust, but this one is good up to about 8 shots without any type of break. The Delonghi is obviously going to be a bit more erratic and is not going to have nearly the thermal stability of the Micra. But I want to see what the real difference is when it comes to the extraction yield and the time, and then slightly kind of just tasting to see if there's anything wild, or the temperature in cup to see if there's anything wild going on. So I'm just going to bang out 3 shots back to back to back on both machines. We're going to note on screen the time and the yield so that you can see if there's big differences, fluctuations going on there. And we're going to look at the temperatures as well of each one. I do all this tasting for you. All right, so this first one, which was the final shot pulled, is markedly different than the other two, but you have to also understand during these comparisons, the putt prep and the grinder and everything else plays a role, so it's not just the machine. So I would actually say that likely the machine was doing the same thing each time because the temperatures were so consistent. But the time was a lot longer on the final one, which just could have been a user error. What we're really looking for there is the temperature in cup to kind of give us an idea of how much variations. Now, I'm not one to believe that just a couple of degrees of difference from shot to shot is going to have a massive difference in the final taste. I've done tests on this. I don't see much of a difference unless you have massive temperature swings over 3 degrees Celsius. This is something else seen at another sensory examination, but in any event, very consistent with that temperature. And anyway, let's try it on the Delonghi. The first shot was quite a bit shorter than the other two, and I think there's a good reason for it. Now, on the first one, I did not flush before pulling. Now, I've noticed on this machine, when you do not flush, water is more readily available to come out. We start it, no water, no water, no water, and then there's water. And as you see, there's steam coming out, which is why you need to flush it. But with my first shot, it didn't need to be flushed because the temperature was still fine. Anyway, once you flush and then go again, sometimes it takes longer. It can be inconsistent. See, that time water immediately came out. With the blooming and everything, it can be inconsistent via time, but I don't necessarily think that's affecting the extraction as much as it looks with the time. So as we saw with the temperature, it was very, very efficient and very consistent. Each time around 64, 65 degrees in cup, which I think is a better metric for what's going on. There's going to be a more consistent dispersion of water out of here using a rotary pump than this one with its vibratory pump. So this one can be a little hit or miss whenever you're timing it. If there's wild temperature fluctuations, that would be a bit more problematic. Say one is 72 in cup, the next 58. That would be wild. But if you're sitting between a 5 degree, 6 degree margin of error within the cup, I think that's more than acceptable. We got to just continue caffeinating. So let's taste these. These are very similar. The first one, as you would imagine, has a different taste because it was pulled first, so it's the coolest. I did try to stir to equalize, but overall, the bodies are all very similar and the tastes are quite similar. There's nothing really, no real big difference there. Even still, consistency is going to go in with the Micra. With this one, you do need to flush between the shots. There's a certain amount that I know based off of my temp testing I showed in my video on it, but in the end, without having to think through things, out of the box, everything, the Micra is obviously way more consistent and is why it's one of my chosen vessels for experimentation. It is very, very consistent like a commercial machine should be. So anyway, let's move on. All right, now we're going to test the steam capabilities. So obviously we'll do both at the same time with the La Marzocco because we're able to. So let's go ahead and get this going. All right, there we have that. I'm very shaky from all the espressos. That's all we're going to get in for today on latte art. Sorry for the disappointment. But anyway, obviously very nice. It's touted for its steam boiler and steam capabilities, and the no burn steam wand. It does a fine job. So yeah, it's fantastic. It's great at steaming milk. One of the best, I think, out there. But you can get silky milky on anything. So let's check out the Delonghi. Of course, this will take longer because we have to pull the shot, then turn on the steam boiler, then steam, or turn on the steam capability so it heats up enough. But anyway, let's go ahead and get it going. All right, it's that steam pressure. All right, jittery hands, all good though. So you can make silky milky and a great textured cappuccino on the Delonghi, but of course the pressure is nowhere near as high and doesn't hold pressure for nearly as long unless you really let that boiler super pressurize. But I wanted to go right when it said it was okay to start. So out of these, obviously, I think the milk texture is a little better with the La Marzocco, but if I let this sit and pressurize for another minute or two and really allow it to, get to where it needs to be, they're pretty equal on the capability of what you can get in your cup. But even still, most people are going to get more consistency, of course, across the board with the La Marzocco, especially with how big that boiler is inside, dedicated to just steaming milk. Now, whether or not espresso's quality is affected by the weight, I don't think that's really a thing. Some of the crema will dissipate for sure, but that's only really a thing that you need to worry about if you're like super anal about latte art. But even still, with a dark roasted coffee, you still need to swirl the mess out of it to get rid of some of the clumpiness. So overall, silky milky, both are great, but definitely the point goes towards the La Marzocco. So there you have it. Now I'm going to pull one on each back to that Tim Wendelboe Honduras coffee. We're going to pull it, we're going to measure extraction, and then I'm going to bring on two special guests, which include my wife and Ugo's wife. They're going to come and taste. Sophia actually used to run a coffee shop with Ugo, so she's very familiar with coffee, and my wife, well, I shove coffee in her face all the time. So let's get right on with it. All right, so both pulled in about 35 seconds. Let's get the extraction yield measured. We have 61.7 yield on the La Marzocco, and we have 51.8 on the Delonghi. All right, ladies, come on and taste these while those samples cool.
Okay. I'm going to go with this one.
Oh, okay. I didn't count
that
yet.
one.
You goobs.
We can do it again.
It's okay. Thank you very much. So Sophia chose this one here. Lindsay chose this one right here. This one is the Micra. So Sophia chose the Micra and Lindsay the Delonghi, which, there you go, another kind of edifier that it's kind of 6/2 one hand, half dozen the other. There we have that. Let's take the measurements themselves. I did make a mistake when I was pulling the shots because I was doing 2 at once, and I pulled the Delonghi one slightly bigger ratio than the La Marzocco, which would mean you would expect obviously a higher extraction from the Delonghi, but you would also expect a lower TDS because of more water. I pulled this one at a 1 to 2.95, so essentially 1 to 3 ratio. This one I did a 1 to 3.2 ratio, the Delonghi. So you'd expect a lower TDS, a lower concentration, but a higher extraction. And this one you would expect a higher concentration and a lower extraction. Now what happened is actually very curious. The Delonghi actually, yes, it had a higher extraction, but the TDS was almost identical, even at the higher yield. So what we had was a 6.97 TDS and a 7.01 TDS, meaning they were statistically, I mean, as far as the margin of error goes, they're the same exact concentration, right? 0.04, that's within the margin of error. So it could be essentially the same exact concentration between the two. But the Delonghi extracted a 1.5% higher at a 22.3 versus a 20.6. So it was a bit of a higher extraction, which is going to cause obviously differences in the opinions of these lovely ladies who came on and tasted. But in the end, one still preferred one the other. It's not a perfect taste test, obviously, but the fact of the matter is, when you're pulling just normal espresso with flat machines, you're getting very similar results to the point where it's difficult to tell the difference, even at a disparity of 1.5%. That's kind of where we're at. I'll go ahead and taste these both. This is the La Marzocco. And this is the Delonghi. And okay, I see this one has a much more intense punchy acidity. This one has a really nice acidity, but it's a bit sweeter. There is a bit more of a bitterness on the end, likely due to the higher extraction. Overall, I would probably prefer taking this shot, the La Marzocco shot, and adding a bit of water to stretch it out, because this one does have a bit of that over extraction kind of tendency to it. But I didn't want to sit and manipulate these shots. I wanted them to be as identical as possible. Of course, manually stopping them both at the same time so the temperature is the same makes it a bit more difficult, and I did flub up and let this one go a little longer than I should have. And I think I did stop it correctly, but with the lack of solenoid, by the time I pulled it away, more had entered in than when I clicked stop, and that's where the issue comes in. And something you have to consider when you have a solenoid-less machine. Once you hit stop, it's not stopping because of the residual pressure that's not been released. La Marzocco has that, so when I hit stop, it stops. All right, so we've come to the end. Let's start at the very end. Actually, we're going back to the beginning, so let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. We're going to go back through and do the little point system. So price, just kidding, it goes to the Delonghi. 1 for Delonghi. Build, reliability, modability, all that good stuff, bada bing, bada boom. That goes to La Marzocco. Heat up time, boom, goes to Delonghi. Sound, boom, goes to La Marzocco. Things are heating up here. Shot pulling, light versus dark. I think they both get a point there, because honestly, I think they both do a capable enough job to where, for me, on both of them, I found very little difference. I will say the crema was curious looking coming out of the Delonghi. It was still thick, just as thick, if not thicker, than what came out of La Marzocco, but there are those bigger bubbles. I will note it did not affect the tactile on my tongue. You might think it might be a little more rough with the bigger bubbles, kind of like in carbonated water, but for me, I didn't really tell a difference. And on light roast, they're you get very similar types of shots. Consistency, boom, goes to the Micra. Steaming, boom, goes to the Micra. Extraction at a constant depth, I would say it's a tie, so it's a wash there. Taste test, it's a tie, so I think it's a wash there. So in the end, based off points, of course, the Micra wins, though it was not for the Delonghi not putting up an incredible fight. So when it comes down to those types of categories, which are for the most part nonsensical, I just kind of created them to see what all measurable metrics we can get into. You do have the Micra winning, of course. But when it comes to what is in your cup, and you take away sound, you take away build quality, because like I said, I think this has really nice build quality, especially amongst its peers. When we look at just what's in the cup, is this worth 40 times more, 30 times more, 20 times more, 10 times more? No. It's not. If you're going, what's in the cup, it is not worth that price disparity in any sense of the term. Even if you're a millionaire, I don't think it's worth the price disparity. If you want something that is a luxury piece, something that is iconic, something that matches your kitchen and you have the expendable income for it, sure, it does technically win when it comes to everything taken into consideration. But there's 2 boilers, so you have more to worry about, especially when it comes to cleaning up and descaling and all of that stuff. There's just more going on inside of this machine, although, albeit, it is much higher quality build. This one, it like I said, it's simple to service. People throw these in landfills, and I don't understand why. I say go buy a $20 Delonghi and fix it yourself. It's very easy. But it comes down to this question of whether you want a luxury item or you want something that's just good in your cup. When it's just good in your cup, you can get incredible coffee on a plethora of different machines at a plethora of different budget price points, or just price points in general. The Delonghi has a 51 millimeter portafilter, which I absolutely love. The fact that it has a lack of a solenoid makes cleaning a lot less intense. You don't need to back flush it because there's no solenoid that you need to clean out. Solenoids, like in the Marzocco, while they give you a dry puck at the end, they release the pressure. You don't have any sneezing. You do have something that is very small, a tiny little hole in the solenoid that needs to be cleaned and back flushed frequently so that you can purge it out fully. That is something, if you're not taking seriously back flushing every week or so, you will have a scale buildup or coffee buildup that is going to ruin it. This one doesn't have that problem. The Delonghi has no solenoid. You can manually bloom your shot without ruining the pressure in the puck and unseating the puck. So, is this a realistic comparison? Of course not. These are 2 different markets, obviously. But for those who are genuinely asking, they're new to coffee, they're new to this gear world, they're curious, like, am I missing out a lot by having a budget espresso machine? The answer is a resounding no. And I hope that today's tests and today's showcase reveals that. There is not a massive taste disparity, but there is one massive caveat. And that is the fact that they're both flat pressure machines, meaning they ramp up to a set pressure based off of what the pump and the spring inside is set at, and they maintain that to the best of its ability until it's no longer able to maintain the pressure, meaning the resistance inside the puck is not high enough to push back in order to give it resistance, right? So, once we get into alternative machines, ones that are not flat pressure machines, obviously the conversation shifts. They're able to do things that these machines cannot, and therefore add some value. So something like the decent espresso machine that I mentioned earlier has the capability of full profiling, whether it is flow profile, pressure profile, or temperature profile, which gives a different category and makes it a bit incomparable to something like the Stylosa or even the Micra. Now, the build quality of the Micra is superior to that of the decent, but at the same price point, the question then becomes, what is in the cup? And the decent can give you a lot of different options that this simply cannot. This is a sort of myopic machine in the sense that it does one style of shot, though you can do some pre-infusion, pre-brewing, but for the most part, one style of shot. And it's a style of shot that I don't prefer. So for me, I would prefer something like a Decent or a Unica Pro, or something that gives me some sort of capability like a Lilith Bianca to control the flow rate. Ideally, I can also control temperature, but right now, there's very few on the market like that. So, when you're buying a machine, these are things you need to ask yourself. If it's a flat bar machine, how expensive do you truly need to go? I think you buy something that you feel comfortable with, the aesthetic of, the build quality of, because if you're going for a flat bar machine, you're going to have very similar tasting espresso without much wiggle room. Now, this is why, one of the reasons why I actually despise flat 9 bars is they have such a small window of tasties, and it's because you normally get a lot of astringency regardless when you're pulling these shots, and the window is so tiny in order to get something that's not kind of bitter and astringent when you're trying to hit a proper extraction to where it's also not sour. That's why a lot of you struggle with dialing in, because you have flat bar machines, meaning it's going to flow water out even at the end of the shot at its highest capability in order to maintain a certain bar of pressure. And at the end is when you're getting a lot of astringent compounds and over extraction through channels and heterogeneous extraction, and it's going to cause not a fun time. That's why I'm a big fan of lever style shots. The flow rate through the puck, the pressure kind of descend throughout that espresso extraction, disallowing some of that intense channeling that happens as the flow rate is ramping up. If what I'm saying is confusing you, I have a full video on the relationship between pressure and flow. Link linked there, and down below you can go watch to have a better understanding of the relationship between these two and how it affects your extraction and the taste of it, and why I hate 9-bar shots or 10-bar shots or 11-bar shots. Anything that's constant pressure, I don't like. And also, don't worry as much about thermal stability. I think a lot of that is just marketing BS, because when you're within 3, 4, 5 degrees, you're not going to taste the difference greatly if you're letting the cup cool to the same amount. Obviously, if you pull 2 shots back to back, one sitting at 65 in cup, one at 59, there will be a taste disparity, and you'll likely prefer the cooler cup because cooler allows for more aroma and different things to come out. But if you allow them to get to the same temperature, you're likely going to not tell much of a difference. So I think that is just about everything I needed to say. I know this was a longer video, so thank you for bearing with me. I hope the time cues were helpful, but like always, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you brew something tasty today, and cheers.